Michael. It's been a while since I've done this. I mean, I did release one episode only. I recorded a bunch and I got behind, and then I talked myself out of posting them. Um, you know, I even tried to talk myself back. I tried to talk myself out of coming even back more times than I want to admit. It's been some time. The imposter syndrome, the second guessing, the little voice that says, "Who do you think you are to host a show like this?" But then I look at everything else around me, not just what's happening in Gaza, but just around the world and in our, own backyard. I can't be quiet. I can't not share the people that I know that have experiences, that have important voices, that have the ability to speak on a lot of different subjects. So we're here, right? So for my first episode back, I wanted to have a conversation that demanded both courage and conscience. And I'm joined by two men whose lives and service sit right here in the center of that tension. So Wes J. Bryant is a retired master sergeant and former special operations joint terminal attack controller, later a senior policy advisor, analyst at the Pentagon Civilian Protection Center of Excellence, and Anthony Aguilar, a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel and Green Beret who became a whistleblower after witnessing what he described as war crimes at the humanitarian aid sites in Gaza. Both of them served in American wars. Both of them believed they were protecting freedom, and now both are using their experience to confront the hard truth of what the power has done abroad and at home. While we may not agree on every detail, every policy, or every nuance, but we agree on this: the right of Palestinians to live freely, safely, and with dignity is non-negotiable. This isn't about politics. It's about humanity, about what happens when we stop turning away. I'm Sara, and this is Seriously Sara. Let's begin.
The United States government is complicit in genocide.
The tank rounds were a disproportionate munition for sure.
You do tend to get a lot of hate from people that you used to call, at one point, call brothers.
My warning to the American people is that we are complicit in this. Tax dollars.
Welcome to Seriously Sarah, where the questions are heavy, the laughs are honest, and the truth refuses to sit still. I'm joined today by Wes J. Bryant and Anthony Aguilar, both military veterans who have become outspoken about Gaza and U.S. policy. We'll unpack how their experiences have reshaped their understanding of service, conscience, and power. Wes, Anthony, thank you both for so much for being here today. You both have been very active and probably have shared these parts of your stories. But before we keep going, I'd like you to tell me what led you to enlist and what kind of values and narratives guided you to that part of your life.
I'll hand it over to Wes to start.
Oh gosh. Well, I enlisted, unlike a lot of GWAT veterans, I actually enlisted pre 9/11, thinking that nothing was ever going to happen, to the United States, and no one was ever going to be stupid enough to attack it. And sure enough, 3 years later, as I'm a young airman up in Fort Drum, New York, of course, I was one of those guys that's attached to the Army. So I joined the Air Force, kind of stupidly volunteering for a job that had me basically a grunt for the Army. No, I say that lovingly, though. I fully volunteered for it to be the guy that goes out there and calls in airstrikes, right? So 9/11, of course, happened when I was stationed up at Fort Drum as a young airman. And then guys from our unit that attached to the 10th Mountain Division, pushed out in the initial deployments after 9/11 into Afghanistan. And then, I had quite a few friends that ended up being attached to both special operations teams, special forces teams, and the Rangers, specialty teams with the Rangers that did a lot of really good and interesting work early on. And then that kicked off 20 plus years of the war on terror, where I supported operations under administrations, both Democrat and Republican. My last deployment was under Trump, under the Trump administration in 2017. At that point, leading a team of JTACs for the Special Operations Task Force Afghanistan against both ISIS-K and the Taliban. That was, of course, after we had pushed into Baghdad in 2014. I helped stand up the initial strike cell in Baghdad against ISIS, and then I had done work in Syria as well against the threat of ISIS in Syria. And so, it was this long and a lot of full circle moments going throughout the war on terror where we felt a sense of patriotism that we were doing the right thing. I think Anthony can agree, but also felt betrayed and confused at various points as far as what was our mission, what was the overall strategy, what was the end point here. And then retired in 2018, and I guess I'll hand it over. That's my military story. I'll hand it over to Anthony.
Thank you.
So my military career also started before the events of 9/11, and then when I commissioned into the Army as an officer during the wars in Afghanistan and wars in Iraq were in full scale, and I actually deployed to combat under Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, and that was my last deployment was in August of 2021 during the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen, I've been deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and Tajikistan and the southern Philippines, and really, as a combat branch, as a combat officer on the ground in all these places and witnessing war at the very front edge of battle, I consider myself to be pretty experienced in what war entails, what it is and what it is not, and laws of armed conflict, the Geneva Convention, and from that experience, 25 years in uniform and many years deployed to combat operations, both high intensity and low intensity insurgencies and counterinsurgencies. What I witnessed on the ground personally in Gaza gave me great concern, because it was not only unlike any level of destruction that I had ever witnessed before, it was also just the grotesque violations of international law, Geneva Convention, laws of armed conflict. And from my experience, what I knew and what I saw, it wasn't a question of maybe. It was surely violations of war crimes and of humanitarian law.
So what broke for y'all? What got through the noise? We talk, it's usually focused on October 7th, but and I was telling Wes, I've been doing a lot of this work for 20 some years. And to me, a lot of the stuff that's coming out now in current times, I'm like, yeah, I remember I was talking about that 18 years ago, but I didn't have, there wasn't the mainstream. So what I'm seeing now, as somebody who's been doing this work for such a long time, I'm like, oh wow, somebody in mainstream is talking about this. I remember talking about this in college, and people were like, you're crazy. This is not real. And I'm like, no, but I have data. I promise. Like, there's proof. But what for you was the point that was the shift? Like, where did Gaza kind of break through for you? What was it that made you kind of look at the things a little bit differently from what you had previously known?
Well, for me, going into Gaza, I did not go into Gaza as a soldier, as a member of the military, as was the experience in my previous combat deployments, being an active duty officer. So I went to Gaza hired as a independent security contractor for UG Solutions, which was the security apparatus under the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And I had never worked that type of contract work. I had never had a job outside of the military. I had just retired in March. So I hadn't done any work outside of the military. This was my first employment experience outside of being in uniform. And I took the job. I was recruited and I took the job under the premise that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was going into Gaza to provide humanitarian aid at scale for the population to replace the UN mechanism, and that we were going to do so in alignment with humanitarian principles. And I very much went there with the same understanding and the same professionalism as I had in my 25 years of service, that, following international laws, doing things that were not only in line with laws, but doing the right thing. And one of those aspects of that was, to actually conduct the mission of feeding a starving population. And it became very clear to me through the planning and the operations laid out to us by the Israeli Defense Forces and their plans in Gaza, and what we were involved in as part of that plan, to include the intentional restriction of food, providing no water, providing limited food to distribution areas that put the population at risk, and also force the population to be displaced from where they live. The distribution centers were built in areas that were far away from the population. All of those components came to me to realize that this was not incompetence and this was not just a bad plan, that this was intentional. And once it became unquestionably clear to me that the United States, through this contract, was complicit in the enactment of genocidal practices, I could not remain quiet about it.
I appreciate that. What about you, Wes?
Yeah, Anthony and I, our paths have converged, but we had a little different path of getting there. As I said, I retired in 2018, and shortly after retirement, initially I wrote a book about my experiences starting the war against ISIS, specifically the strike campaign. And really from there, what that kicked off is a career as a public voice in national security analysis focused on strike operations. What started for me, what it started from was that I saw the American public largely, but as well, the international public, quite ignorant on how the U.S. in particular conducted combat operations, waged the war on terror, and conducted strike operations. Well, from there, that was years built up from about 2019 to 2023, right, where I was continually involved in national security analysis, specifically focused on strike and targeting operations, as well. Had some experience in the defense industry, so I was getting into defense technology, specifically focused on targeting munitions sensors, right? So, when Gaza kicked off, of course, after October 7th, I think like any of us, I was very, and I'm still supportive of Israel defeating and dismantling Hamas itself as a terrorist organization. But I'd say within the first month of operations, it became a thing for me where I was watching this war from afar and all of the reports that were coming out and saying, this is not how it should be done. This is shameful. This is tragic. And hearing, the Israeli military and government come back and say, well, we have to do it like this, and give all of their, of course, justifications of why not only they're following international law, but they're waging a just war. And so, that materialized into me by December. I decided I've got to, I'm one of the only public voices out there with my background, if not the only, in targeting and strike operations. And I've got to put something out talking about this strike campaign. And so that started, kicked off a couple of op-eds that I got in the Hill, December and January. And those were pretty hard hitting. Those were seen by a lot of representatives. One in particular was Senator Van Hollen of Maryland. And from there, he's fantastic individual and strong-willed, I'll say.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of respect for him and everything he's doing. But He brought me in along with Josh Paul, who retired out of the State Department out of protest.
Hmm.
Another amazing individual, Nora Ericat. She's a
Hmm.
human rights lawyer.
Hmm. Hmm.
Charles Blaha out of
Hmm.
the State Department, and quite a few others. And so we formed a task force specifically looking at war crimes, IHL violations in Israel, not just in regard to
Hmm.
how Gaza by Israel, not just in regard to how they were waging their strike campaign, but their enablement or lack thereof of humanitarian operations.
Hmm.
And that was last year. That was over a year ago now. We submitted that report to Congress, the
Hmm.
State Department by May. We briefed Congress and closed hearings about the same time. And then shortly after that, I joined the Pentagon in a specialized role under what was then SecDef, Secretary of Defense Austin's new program for civilian harm mitigation and response.
Hmm.
So I joined the Pentagon as a specialist in targeting, and I became the chief, what was called the chief of civilian harm assessments, basically trying to figure out how we robustify the U.S. DoD's, U.S. military's
Hmm.
ability to prevent civilian harm, to respond to it, to conduct more precise warfare. And part of that, actually, part of the mission was evolving. It was going to be evolving into assisting in the Ukraine conflict,
Hmm.
potentially advising and assisting Israel as we were able.
Hmm.
But of course, that position lasted a year, and come January 20th, we were all but done. And I was removed from that role by March, and the center's hence being resolved at this
Hmm.
point. So that was
That's
my
really,
path to where we're at now. And,
yeah.
since I work with international media constantly, helping with investigations in Gaza, specifically strike operations, but most recently ground sniper and drone
Hmm.
sniper killings against children.
Hmm.
And also I've been helping advise UN Commission of Inquiry on human rights.
Yeah. We talked about how kind of things shifted for both of you and how this, we've talked about a lot of the humanitarian part of this, where it's food, water, children. How do we, and we have the ceasefire deal that's theoretically there. I'd like to say it's completely in action, but I've been reading reports recently that there are some things that have been broken as of already. I've seen reports of some of the Palestinian prisoners that were released. Their neighborhoods and their families are now being harassed by Israeli forces. So how do we uphold? How do we, as the United States, who was the broker of that deal, how do we put pressure on our government to say, hey, like this has to go through. This has to be something that's not, because I was asked, do you have hope? I'm like, I hope, but we've been through this a few times now that I'm still doubtful that it can hold. Especially with the widespread. There's the reactions that are on the ground in the West Bank. What's going on with settlers expanding beyond their scope, and then the other issue with like there's bombing still in southern Lebanon, so that they're still getting bombed there. So how do we help influence the mitigation of that?
Well, I think that the ceasefire that we have brokered has put the United States in a very precarious position because we have diplomats and leaders that are not deeply informed and knowledgeable about the history of the region and the various nation states and players, both Arab nation states and
Mhm.
Israel and the history of Palestine and the history of the region to really understand the what we were stepping into to be the referee in this, because now we the United States are now responsible. And I think that what I have always feared in this region, particularly with Israel's actions and particularly with Arab nations growing away from US partnership, which we in the last month we've seen clearly with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan
Mhm.
signing a security agreement.
Mhm.
And Qatar questioning their partnership in the region with us because of the strikes, not once but twice. And now you see this, building of a Qatari jet facility in Mountain Home, Idaho, almost as if it's a condolence gift.
Hmm.
Sorry, please still be our friends. What what is very, very concerning to me now is that the the ceasefire is only phase one of part one of this
Hmm.
20-point peace plan. So we haven't even really stepped across the starting line of the peace plan. And for anyone that thinks that this is the start of the peace plan and this is the start of negotiations, that's not true. The ceasefire was agreed upon by Hamas, Palestinian Authority, and Israel and the US and others, but that's it. There was no other, in terms of the demilitarization. That had not been discussed and agreed to yet. Or what happens beyond the 72-hour ceasefire and the exchange of the hostages. None of that was confirmed or pen to paper or left with a confirmation of what was going to happen. It was basically just a big hand wave of hope, and nothing was laid out in any ways of accountability. And now you see there hasn't been a ceasefire. The ceasefire hasn't started. On paper, it has.
Hmm.
Bombs are still being dropped in Gaza. People are still being killed by large numbers.
Hmm.
The now Israel has said, well, you haven't given us back all of the dead hostages, so we are now going to cut off aid again and continue our offensive in central Gaza. And now what leverage or what cards does Hamas have to bring to the table now in terms of diplomacy or political end? None. Israel drew the United States into being the interlocutor of this. We did, knowing that this is not leading to any type of immediate or lasting peace. But here's what Israel got out of it: the U.S. is now on the line. We have sent 200 U.S. soldiers under United States Central Command to advise or establish this force. 200 soldiers is not enough to do anything. Company
Hmm.
commanders in the army command more than 200 soldiers. What I fear that is the Israeli government having convinced and tricked in a way, because our leaders are not too well steeped in diplomacy, into having U.S. troops on the ground, now putting them in danger. Imagine now some type of false flag or attacked by one of these armed gangs that's in Gaza, that's not Hamas, but to all Westerners look like Hamas, which then pulls the United States into a larger conflict, which then puts the United States in a position to where we have to then back Israel because we are the ones that took responsibility of this Donald Trump peace and prosperity proclamation and plan. That's what it's called. So we own it now. We
Hmm.
went into the into the infection with not enough, without the right medicine, and now we own
Right.
it, and it's
Right.
scary. It's very scary.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll caveat that with, with this 200 person force conducting essentially security and stability operations and helping to rebuild Gaza, right? Purportedly, the Department of Defense internally has gutted civil affairs as a career field, and that's going to be, or that should be, the primary driving force in this civil military coordination task force. And also, don't forget, we've completely gotten rid of USAID,
Hmm.
uh, which ideally, should be on the ground with this task force, integrated with this task force, in order to make this mission successful the way that it should be.
Hmm.
And then when we look at the long term, I think what Anthony said, hit it right on the head. And we go back to, I was just reviewing, Netanyahu's speech during the UN Assembly. and the things he was saying specifically about civilian harm mitigation. But what
Mm-hmm.
also struck me, which applies to this long term, is, he was reiterating this blanket demonization of the Palestinian populace. He
Mm-hmm.
said the Palestinians turned Gaza into a terror base, not Hamas. He said the Palestinians turned Gaza into a terror base. He's talking about the nations and entities that want to create a Palestinian state. And he says, these are the people you want to give a state to.
Mm-hmm.
You're giving an ultimate reward to intolerant fanatics who perpetrated and supported October 7th. And then he compared giving the Palestinians a state close to Jerusalem would be like giving Al-Qaeda a state close to New York City after September 11th. And he didn't differentiate
Mm-hmm.
Hamas. If he had said that, maybe, okay, we can understand. But when you say blanket, the Palestinians are, that tells me that there's really no hope for long-term peace and stability. And of course, it's not to say we haven't seen the same rhetoric from specifically Hamas. But again, Hamas is a terror organization, and there's a reason they're designated as that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that rhetoric is it's reflective of, well, what a lot of senior Israeli military and government officials have said for years, where they're dehumanized. They're calling all Palestinians animals. There's statements saying that a certain amount of children or child deaths are acceptable. That we should kill 50 Palestinians for every, or 50 or 200 for every one hostage. All of these just kind of real crazed statements over these last couple of years. And then, of course, I'd like to point your listeners to the Israeli whistleblower site, Breaking the Silence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Familiar?
Mm-hmm.
Where you can see all of these really what I'd call brave Israeli soldiers speaking out, a lot of them anonymous because they have to, and saying what they saw on the inside. And that's to look at this on the broad scale, though there's a lot of support for what Israel is doing among mainstream Israeli government, the military, even in the populace. We also have to, on our end, not demonize all of Israel, right? The way that they're demonizing all of Palestine, the way that these individuals are, and realize that there are moral people within the IDF that are saying this is wrong. There's a lot of moral Israelis, Jewish Israelis, that are standing up and saying this is wrong, and those are the people that we have to equally partner with in this.
So my question for you, now that we've kind of covered with the agreement, and like you said, it's a ceasefire that hasn't even progressed into the steps needed to move forward. Like, what are we actually doing? What is the plan? What about when we're talking about U.S. power complicity? If we're now an interlocutor of this deal that we put into place, as Anthony was saying, how has that shifted our understanding of our power and our actual complicity and what Israel is doing that is beyond, I guess, any human rights code, any kind of human protections code, whether it's, or my field where it's medical research, a lot of those codes, but also in warfare, what is allowed and what's not allowed? How are we now implicating ourselves as possible, as we move forward? And
Yeah,
how are we
my
shifting?
position on this from my first in speaking out is that my warning to the American people is that we are complicit in this. Tax dollars from the United States are being spent in this. Separate that from the fact that the joint deployed air munitions and GBUs that are dropped from Israeli aircraft that blow up Palestinian buildings in Gaza are U.S. supplied. And I would say that, if from one angle, that if the Israeli Defense Force is so bad and unable to discriminate or target properly to where they're just blowing up everything, and they're not, let's say the argument is they're not doing it intentionally. Well, if they're that bad at it, they shouldn't be given those munitions. And the other side of it, if they're doing it intentionally, and what they're doing is absolutely intentional and known, then we shouldn't be giving them those munitions. I do not understand why there is this reluctance to identify the reality, in that you almost have to have a sense of cognitive dissonance to look at the situation and say that, well, that's not happening, therefore we don't have to take any action. And I think it's no coincidence that from the momentum building up into the United Nations General Assembly, the recognition of a Palestinian state, the declaration of a few weeks prior to the UNGA, that there was indeed a level of famine, and then the declaration by the UN that it was a genocide, that our political leadership had to do something. We could no longer continue to just pretend that it wasn't happening. But now that that box has been opened, Israel has lost control of the crime scene, if you will, meaning in Gaza, and the truth will be seen. We're already seeing more images coming out of northern Gaza, of central Gaza, and we haven't really gotten in deep into Gaza City yet, where there's still risks and threats, unexploded ordnance, artillery still being dropped. You know, Israel hasn't ceased fire. They've stopped dropping large 2,000-pound munitions from aircraft, but they're still firing artillery and tank rounds and fighting on the ground. That has not stopped. So as we see more and more of this in Gaza, I think that'll be of grave concern to most Americans, to where we must do more. My concern is that there will be something going further, some type of edict by Israel that states that, you know, they're not abiding by the ceasefire, so we have to go back in militarily, and they complete the destruction and covering of the evidence, if you will. When you look at the amounts of rubble and just piles of rubble in Gaza, and what's buried underneath all that rubble, the death toll is far more than 100 to 120,000. The Israeli former military leaders have even disclosed that it's more likely north of 500,000. There are hundreds of thousands of bodies buried in the rubble. That will soon come to light. I fear what the United States, our government, our leadership is going to do, and what they're going to say. If they take the side of, well, that's acceptable and that's happened and that's just war, let's just move on, we are in a bad place in humanity. If we have to take action, what action do we take? Because we have been complicit in it along the way. We have to also hold ourselves accountable. So I'm very concerned as to what the coming months entail in terms of accountability, in terms of what Israel will be further allowed to do without or with impunity, and how the United States will respond. Are we going to really turn our back on all of our long allies that have been our allies since before World War One? We're going to turn our back on them over Israel, saying that that everybody else in the world is wrong, everybody else in the world is lying, everybody else that is calling it a genocide is wrong, and that Israel is the only one that's right, and that the U.S. is going to stand by them, knowing very well that Israel time and time again has shown us that they will lie to our face. And I don't mean the people of Israel, I mean the government of Israel.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah. What were you gonna say, Wes? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to add on to that to say that, you know, having done in-depth analysis of countless, really dozens of strike incidents, as well as, you know, reports of ground artillery, tank fire, ground sniper fire against civilians. You know, I can say that my position now is that the Israeli military has been wholly carrying this out intentionally. And there's two aspects to that. One is the proportionality aspect, where most often they make the decision to strike or conduct an attack against what they identify as a Hamas target, even knowing that there are civilians, men who are not Hamas, women and children, up to in the dozens and the hundreds at times. And then there's the other side of actual intentional killing of civilians. of labeling whole areas as civilian free, where anything that's moving, anyone that's moving is a combatant automatically, which is against international law and against anything I'm used to and Anthony's used to as far as U.S. and coalition targeting and target vetting standards, right? And then intentionally, I'm finishing a report right now that'll be published within the next week or two, jointly with Dr. Mimi Syed, who's done 2 rotations in Gaza, looking at both sniper fire and drone sniper fire, so these tactical quadcopters that have rifles attached, right, against children. And the evidence, the overwhelming evidence, is that these killings and these strikes, some of which result in injury, some of which result in death, can't be anything but intentional.
Yeah. And, we talked, I don't know if you guys remember, I don't know, you may have heard about the March to Return that occurred a few years ago in Gaza, that it was a peaceful march by young people that went to the edge, basically the gates, and said, hey, we want to be able to leave. And they were shot. I highly recommend looking into that, but there was a lot of injuries conducted by Israeli sniper fire that caused either they couldn't walk, paralysis, or in the legs, arms, or lower regions, to prevent them from ever moving forward. So I feel like it's a tactical, and based on the information I've gathered over the years, it's a tactical move that the Israeli military has done, even when there is a nonviolent, experience that's set up, whether it's with children, whether it's with young people, no weapons, just signs. And how do we as a country, and like you said, Anthony, we're complicit, we're paying, we pay for the munitions, we give them, and we're paying our taxes, and currently right now our government's shut down and we can't pay, some of even our own military, the reserves, have been put on hold for a little bit. I don't know if that's gotten resolved yet. I haven't been able to keep up. But what do we do and risk mitigation? The way I see it is risk mitigation. How do we reduce the risk, and what are the actual solutions that we have moving forward? What can we do? I know I'm kind of going off of what we've been talking about, and I was planning on going a different direction, but I like the way this conversation's been moving. So how do we mitigate the risks of attacking more children and more, people that are not involved in the fighting? They're really just trying to survive. And by all human rights codes and international law, that's off limits. But it seems like that's kind of not on the table these days. It's a blanket statement. And like you said, Anthony, the truth is yet to fully come out, because as we see it clearing out, we're going to find a lot. And it is going to be, I think, a lot of PTSD on a very different level that we've ever seen before. And not just from a psychological perspective, from a health perspective. What are children that were consistently hearing the drones? What is that going to do to their mental state? What is the fears? What are the biological issues that are going to arise generations down the line because of this? And that population, for those that were able to get out, and those that are still there. And so how are we?
I think the term, genocide is not only meets the threshold of its description, but is accurate in that, a generation is being wiped out, killed. And the generation that follows that is suffering from that genocide will also be impacted by that genocide. The level of starvation and malnutrition and what's happened to the development of children in Gaza has been so impactful that it has changed their DNA. This war will cause a change to Palestinian heritage moving forward. It changed the DNA. That's how impactful this is. It's like if you were to look at a tree and look at its rings, and somewhere in the middle of it there's some kind of big effect to it, you'd be like, what happened? Oh, well, that was 1,000-year flood 1,000 years ago, and look at the impact it had. This is that impact on Palestinian society. And now what really, I guess, concerns me in this is that every nation yields 4 aspects of military power: diplomacy, information, its military, and its economy. Diplomatically, we are compromised. Our leaders are compromised. Our information space is compromised.
Mhm.
We have a foreign government, Israel, paying U.S. influencers in the United States to influence a certain narrative and agenda on social media, influencing the minds of many. CBS, MSNBC, bought by the second richest man in the world. The first
Mhm.
richest man in the world owns X.
Mhm.
Both go by what Trump tells them to do, or Israel. It's very frightening. And when you look at how this plays out, in that, we constantly we say Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. Well, I ask, what is Hamas? Because the UN Resolution 242 confirmed or affirmed that there is a right to resist occupation, even through armed struggle. So
Mhm.
if the IDF is Israel's defense force, well, there too, then Hamas would be the defense force of Palestine. They are entitled to that resistance force established by a UN General Assembly resolution. And yet the
Mhm.
United States, at every turn, we downplay, mitigate, badmouth, minimize the UN. Well, in 2001, when the strikes of 9/11, when we needed justification to go into Afghanistan on October 7th, well, we invoked UN Security Council resolutions that stated we had that right to do so.
Mhm.
So we use the United Nations, both the Security Council and the General Assembly, when it fits our desires. But when it doesn't match the narrative what Israel wants to do, and not us, but Israel, we undermine it. It is concerning, because when we start undermining the UN and undermining resolutions and undermining
Mhm.
the Security Council and the General Assembly, then we undermine it for everyone, for us included. And we're really shooting ourselves in the foot over standing with Israel. And when you look at it, it's not strategically or in a security aspect prudent to do so. We have compromised lawmakers who vote with it because they either are compromised financially,
Mhm.
compromised personally, blackmail, or they do believe in a Zionist state to then further fulfill a Christian Zionist vision of the world. And that is frightening. That is not a world that is safe for anyone.
Mhm. I actually wanted to ask, we have several representatives and senators that hold dual citizenship between Israel and the US. How does that, again, conflict of interest? To me, the way I see it is, we have rules about dual citizenship, and they have to be an ally. And I know there's a lot of rules in that. I'm just a US citizen. So
Me too.
I'm like, I haven't invested time in the rest of it. But the reality is we have several people that serve in our government that are now that hold a duality. And then at, at what point, and what makes me laugh is because there have been members of Congress that have come out and said, if you hold a dual citizenship or you're an immigrant to the US, you can never serve in this, the Congress or the Senate. But I argue that if that's the case, then anybody that holds any kind of dual citizenship, even if there was somebody if somebody came in as a refugee and became a US citizen and that's it, that's all they have, then I could argue that maybe that might be a better caveat than holding an independent citizenship here into another country that could put us at risk. I think that it questions your allegiance. And if we're in states of, if you're in Congress and you're somebody that's a lawmaker, how do you think that influences potentially how they think? Not just the money, but the actual thought process of who do I defend? Who am I standing for?
I think what this reveals to me, especially the dual citizenry aspect of it, is an underlying racism that still exists in the United
Hmm.
States. Just as an
Hmm.
example, to tie it to this
Hmm.
dual citizenship aspect,
Hmm.
the far right are up in arms over Bad Bunny being selected to play at the halftime show, saying that
Yes.
we're going to set up an alternate event, an all-American show. Bad Bunny is an American citizen.
Yep.
He has been an American citizen his entire life. He has
Hmm.
lived in the United States his entire life. He is not a dual citizen. He is an American. But we surely can have this all-American event to compete with the Super Bowl funded by dual citizen Israelis. Because if you're a dual citizen but you're Israeli, well then that's okay. Let's look at this, and why that connects to this dual citizen fear is that you have Miriam Adelson. She's like 600 billion. I don't know. She's very, 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 very wealthy into the magnitude of billions. And she donated over $300 million to Trump's campaigns over the years. She is the one that said she wanted the U.S. embassy in Israel moved to Jerusalem. She is the one that told Trump how he should work with Israel in foreign policy. She was at the ceasefire deal showcase ceremony in Israel. She's not a public figure. She's not a diplomat. She's a rich lady. And she was there. And Trump thanked her in front of the world. Thank you, Miriam, for your donations to my campaign. Did I do a good job? Remember when you gave me $300 million and I told you I'd move Jerusalem, the embassy to Jerusalem, and I did that? Did I not do a good job? And I asked her, who does she love more, Israel or the United States? And she wouldn't answer me. And it's clear to me that she loves Israel more. And that's okay. And everybody laughs and claps. I mean,
Yeah.
I do not understand how we as the United States can possibly tolerate that. This is not something that we read in a special secret file or fell out of the Epstein files or something that came out of a secret dossier. He said it on stage with the Israeli flag draped in front of him. The President of the United States. Miriam, did I do a good job? How can we... I'm telling you, when we get pulled into the next war, it's going to be bloody because we do not have air dominance, air superiority, maritime dominance over these nations in this region. It will be bloody. And do you think Miriam Adelson's children are going to fight in this war? Do you think Donald Trump's children will fight in this war? Do you think Pete Hegseth's children will fight in this war? No, we will. The same people that have always fought in wars. The lower class, the middle class, and the rich will profit. That's what's coming, and America needs to wake up.
I've always been very active. Like I was the past 20 years. I will openly say I was the one that was protesting all the wars very early on in my life because I'm like, this is not the path. Because the way I studied the Vietnam War as a very young high schooler, and I remember when I learned about the draft and everything that went in. I said, war is a blue collar experience. These politicians and these wealthy men and women don't send their kids, and it's rare, but it put us in a very bloody state. And if we continue down this path, I feel like what happened in Iraq and in Afghanistan, we still ended up losing a lot of people. And our support of our veterans is nothing. It's very difficult, and it's give or take, depending on who's in charge and how everybody's feeling. I think that it's something that if we continue down this path, puts us in a pretty precarious situation, like you said. And Wes, what were you going to say? I didn't want to interrupt you. Sorry.
No, I completely agree. And just a quick caveat on a lot of what Anthony was saying on the racism piece. I really truly believe this is what it comes down to. We can take what's going on with ICE as a microcosm, where so much of America doesn't care what's happening with these people because they are frankly brown. And if Palestinians were not brown and predominantly Muslim, a lot more Americans would have cared a lot earlier on, including the Democrats in the Biden administration and the majority of Democrats within that administration complicit as well.
Yep. And that's what I think. I will never alleviate either party from their responsibility to what we see. I don't think either one of them has been better than the other. I think there are some representatives. Van Hollen was one. I did get to go see the documentary about who killed Shireen Abu Akleh and his responsibility and how he's been active in trying to find how she was murdered, the Al Jazeera reporter a few years ago. And I thought, it was nice to see somebody from our Congress, representing and coming to say, hey, that's a U.S. citizen you shot and killed, regardless of where she was. And she was wearing a press jacket. How are we going to continue on this path? And he was given roadblock after roadblock. But yeah, I think that we are in a we're neither party is alleviated of this responsibility. They're both complicit in it, unfortunately, which, in the past it was like, oh, we're the better ones, we're the better ones. But there's a component of racism. Being somebody who is Palestinian, who had grandparents that fled in 1948, where we're from doesn't exist. I actually recently learned where the area that we're from in 1948 was gone. So we've never had anywhere to, I've never actually been back to Palestine. That was one of my favorite questions somebody asked me, like, oh, you're Palestinian, have you ever been back? And I kind of just looked at him like, that's a very interesting question. No. We were gone. We were gone. My father came to the country as a young man. My mom came that's our family's journey, that we all came here and everybody was very young, and then we progressed into the generation that I'm in. um Now, we did bring up that concept of racism. And now that we know kind of how much Israel's been involved, and I remember sending you guys the question, we look at the student encampments. Remember that whole thing that was occurring, and how they were dismantled, how professors are being fired, how even recently a UNC professor, because of his work on, against fascism, not even specifically about
Mm.
Palestine. What are your thoughts on where that comes from? Because to me, I know that I have seen proof that certain organizations send pay for our police force to be sent to Israel to be trained. And then they come back here and they implement a lot of the same, you know, tactics. And theoretically, security forces, the way the letter was written that I saw was like, oh, it's just an international police exchange, it's security forces exchanging information, which makes it seem very like vanilla. But realistically, it's not, because we see how our police forces interact with the public. We're looking at it in different cities, whether it's in New York, whether it's in Chicago, whether it's in Durham, whether it's in, we get snippets. And right now we're a little overshadowed because ICE is doing all the stuff that it's doing in Chicago, and we're trying to figure that out. But how do you think that influences all of our domestic policy, not just the foreign policy, with that theme?
Well, I hold true to the notion that, the brutality and the oppression that we export abroad will always come home. It's apparent. It's the ICE operatives operating in the streets of our cities, are carbon copies of how the Israeli
Mhm.
gendarmerie, that's the militarized police force within Israel, operates, because they train with them.
Mhm.
That's not some Area 51 secret that only a few people know about. That's blatant and in the open. They train with
Mhm.
them.
Mhm.
So, we see this time and time again, and I it's sometimes, I just it's so obvious in so many cases where, um I remember I was watching this older clip from President Trump when he used to call one of the female um, senators, because she claimed and she does have a percentage of Native American ancestry, and he calls her
Oh.
Pocahontas. And
Mhm.
it's like, this is our president. This
Mhm.
is this is
Mhm.
frightening. And um, what I think it is, what I try to mention to folks when I talk with them around the country, is that, this is racism because of those that are in power. That power one day will change. And if we don't have values that we all abide by, then the next in power, you may be the oppressed. You may be
Mhm.
those shackled and chained, because this is not a matter of who's the powerful one in charge. It's just a matter of when is the powerful one in charge, and that changes over time. And I think, we we as the citizenry have to do more. We have to mobilize. We have to demand. We have to get uncomfortable. We
Hmm.
have to get uncomfortable. We have to realize that maybe you can't spend all day on your social media and order DoorDash and have your groceries delivered to your house. And we might have to get uncomfortable and take to the streets and mobilize and make our voices heard. Can that work? It can. Look at what they've done in Italy. Look at what they've done in Ireland. Look at what they've done in the United Kingdom, Spain, Canada. Every other country is waking up and doing what we Americans kind of like you know did first. Like that's our thing. Like civil uprising, civil obedience, fighting
Right.
protesting against the man, throwing tea into the harbor and saying we won't have taxation without representation. That's our thing. And the world is like, here we are, and you're just sitting there blind. And
Yeah.
I fear that by the time most Americans wake up, it will be too late.
You brought something up that reminded me of a high school teacher I had. I love her to death. This woman, I remember this is back in, we're just going into Iraq and Afghanistan. She said, remember, be careful what you do. The more extreme you get, the more, the further apart it gets, the more dangerous it gets. And you just brought up that point. You reminded me of how she literally said, the more disproportionate it gets, the worse it's going to get. And people are going to you're going to realize that it's going to get worse. So just because you're okay now, you may not be okay in the next round or whoever comes up next. And so I appreciate you bringing that up. I think
Yeah.
that we have now, and going back to the idea of no taxation, taxation without representation. That's basically where we're at. We're getting taxed. We have to pay our taxes. We have to, but we're not represented accurately because the majority, if you look at the polls, the way that our country is moving, people want healthcare, people want safety, people want our tax dollars to be invested in our communities and our schools. That's not where our tax money is going. It's going into other ventures and other, whether it's war, whether it's funding other countries that we don't need to be a part of, and like you said, it's a racist aspect because our communities need funding. Our streets and our city workers need funding. When I was asked at the protest, the question of hostages came up. She said, well, do you want the freedom of I said, I want the freedom of all hostages, whether it's the Palestinians, the 10,000 Palestinians that are held from the children, all the way up to, if the Israeli the hostages that were captured in Gaza. I said, because everybody deserves the dignity of, a life full of dignity, just like our city workers, that, deserve a dignified wage. We shouldn't be talking about people that pick up trash and that kept our cities alive during the pandemic and paying them pennies. We have tax dollars and we need to use them to represent ourselves. I appreciate you bringing that up. Wes, did you want to add anything on this?
Yeah, I think real quickly, this administration and really the MAGA movement, which I call an ideology of extremism, and I think all three of us here do, as do many, they operate off of two things. Well, really three: fear, power, and hate.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
the ICE operations, the masked operatives. I mean, the only people I ever saw wearing masks were the terrorists that I was going to war against. And that's what that invokes. They talk about this doxing and they're afraid of being doxed. Well, part of a police force in a democratic nation is it means transparency. It means that's the risk you have to take to be an officer, right? And I don't buy really any of that excuse. I think the majority of it is to look intimidating, to invoke fear and terror among the populace and among the people that they're trying to go after.
Mhm.
And I find, the administration and the MAGA sphere kind of hits back a lot at these comparisons to Hitler. But frankly, there are so many comparisons. I mean, you can't even keep track of the comparisons between Trump himself and things that Hitler and the Hitler regime did and carried out, and really all tyrants and authoritarians before and after. And frankly, I firmly believe that a lot of the things that Hitler carried out that he could get away with during those times, where you had information couldn't get out nearly as easily or nearly as quickly. Firmly believe that if Trump and many of in his circle had that ability, they'd be doing a lot of the same things. That's where their moral base is. It's that low, and it's only because they actually have so much visibility on them that they don't carry out even more.
hmm And I think, I remember something that really stuck with me in my studies and, through history is the idea of appeasement. Hitler was appeased and he was
Yeah.
able to kind of keep pushing the envelope because everybody's like, all right, we'll just keep trying to make it. All right, if we let him have this, we can, he'll get away with this.
Mhm.
If he, and like you said, tyrants typically do that. They push and they keep adjusting until they get what they want. And then
And he,
it's, anything's on fire.
yeah, and he came up in a democracy
Yep.
as well.
Yep.
That's what we have to remember.
Yeah.
And I think, the part of history, if we don't keep learning history and actually a nuanced version of history, we
Mhm.
run the risk of repeating it. And where it feels like we're kind of in a state of repeat, of repetition because we didn't actually fix the root cause. Meaning if we're not going to address what's within ourselves and our societies and our neighborhoods and our people, then we're just going to keep propagating the same thing.
Mhm.
Um, you know, we're talking about some negative things, but I want to kind of shift this. The next question is, where do you see hope and change emerging for yourselves and what you do? What are things that kind of draw you into that before we close out this session?
Mhm. It's a hard one.
Is there any hope?
Go ahead, Anthony.
I'm trying. It's hard. I mean, I think,
I,
what do you go
I
ahead.
can say my hope is, and actually, Anthony, you and I have talked about this. At least knowing that people like us, the others out there that are taking the same stances and positions, history will be on our side, and we'll be able to sleep well at night. We'll be able to face our children now or in the future, our grandchildren, and be able to say that, we were on the side of morality through all of this, whether it be these domestic issues we're talking about under this administration, or everything going on with the Israeli Palestinian conflict. It's hard to find any immediate hope right now,
It
though.
is.
I will
It
say
is.
that.
It is.
Well,
Um,
you know, I I converse with myself a lot, trying to play devil's advocate in my own head about looking at both sides of things. Well, why does someone see it this way? Is it this way? Is it that way? And to me, it's clear that if our nation is going to behave and engage and act this way, both in the world and domestically, that that is a mandate that we no longer we no longer believe in laws or the Constitution or what it stands for, and the powerful can pick and parcel what laws they want to follow and what they don't. To every right wing make America great person, where's where's America first right now? We're giving $3.8 billion, just cut the check, just cut our annual child support check to Israel on the, our annual payment while our government is shut down. How's that America first? If the government can infringe upon our First Amendment rights, what's next? Second Amendment rights. So to all these people that think that across the spectrum, left or right, middle or up, down, whatever way you are, they're the powers that be will come after everything because their motive is, the Constitution scares tyrants. That's why we have it. The Constitution and rights and the rights of the citizens irritate tyrants. Trump has even said at times that he's frustrated by the obstacles in the First Amendment. Really, those aren't obstacles; those are called rights. So, I am hopeful that America as a society, we always wake up late. We always hit the snooze button of history. World War One, World War Two, Vietnam, everything going on in Afghanistan at the time, in Iraq. In Afghanistan, after we sponsored and funded and armed the Mujahideen to push the Soviet Union out of Afghanistan. The CIA personnel that had been on the ground working that case said, "Hey, if we mitigate and just turn our back on this organization, they could become something much more powerful." nah, it won't happen. And sure enough, 20 years later, here comes Al Qaeda, founded by the very person we funded. We constantly hit the snooze button, and we're doing it now. The alarm has been going off, and we just keep hitting the snooze button. Eventually, history is going to rip us out of the bed, and we have to do something. I feel that I don't know what that will be, and I'm scared for what that's going to be. I am frightened. I have fought in 4 named wars, 12 combat deployments. I've been wounded in combat. I've seen horrific things, and I'm scared.
I think that that's a good analysis. I appreciate that analysis because it is scary. There's a lot of stuff that's happened in the past. I would say past 30 years, but really it dates back further than that. And we just keep kind of showing up and then not really addressing what's going on. And then I think sometimes we try to control the situation, thinking that we have, if we put a player in there and then let them go and fund them, that we can still control them. But realistically, you can't come into a space expecting that and then expect that people are going to follow through on what you want them to do once they've had their own governance. It's you've lost control at that point. And at what point do we leave entities to govern themselves? I think that constantly comes up into play is we have spaces and territories and we go back to the British colonialism. It kind of ended, but I think it really just shifted the narrative and who was in charge of it and how did we leave those spaces and expect them to govern themselves after we had demolished them, and where do we go from there? So yeah, I try to see hope. I try to hope in the fact that these conversations are becoming more open. I'm trying to see that there's change because I've been doing this, like I said, for 20 years. I can tell you the conversation that I'm having with y'all would not have happened 20 years ago. I think as openly and as clear as this, with the amount of information that both of you have, I can tell you that my colleagues and my peers did not ever have any of this access. And now I'm starting to see these conversations, not just with both of you, but people that are my age that are like, oh, did you know about the USS Liberty? And I'm like, yes. What would you like to know? Because, I got to see the redacted documents when I was in college. That was a professor of mine worked closely with Jimmy Carter. And she was like, hey, let's talk about this. It was a small class. I think there's more to what we don't know. I think we're in a period of discovery and a period that we can decide which path we want to take. We're at across, what's the word? What I'm talking about, intersection. There we go. It's been a long day. An intersection. And we can choose which path that we want to take as a country, as a population, but it's going to take us putting force and understanding of our leaders. Hey, this is not the way it's going. We're not okay with this. And like you said, we have to get uncomfortable. We have to be speaking up. We have to be squeaky wheels. And it's going to take a large portion of us to do it and not just live in this social media / DoorDash world. Though sometimes it's convenient, I'm not gonna lie.
Well, there's so many. I mean, it's sometimes it's almost if we're in a catatonic state of,
Mhm.
hey, that's wrong. Oh, Netflix
Mhm.
has got a new show coming out. Well, let me go back to don't care about
Yeah.
that anymore. Like our
Yeah.
attention span has gotten to the
Yes.
point to where everything, like, I
Yeah.
just, I literally, I was in DC sitting outside having coffee, and I
Mhm.
was overhearing conversations around me.
Mhm.
And one group, the people were having a conversation about what they each thought about, hey, my friend so and so lives here, and they were having a conversation about the West Bank, and I thought, wow, this is
Mhm.
intriguing. So I sat there and
Mhm.
just kind of people listened,
Mhm.
didn't want to stare at him and be a weirdo. But within like 30 seconds of the conversation, it's like, oh yeah, what are we gonna do for dinner tonight? This and that. Bloop, that conversation's gone out the window. And I'm just like, we cannot focus on anything long enough. And to think
Mhm.
that the the government hasn't designed it that way.
Mhm.
I can't remember this quote, but it's a great quote. It's one of the founders of our nation that says, if you think the government's up to something, don't worry, they are, and it's much worse than you think it is. And
I mean, It's the idea of when the government came out and said, we have a report, aliens are real. We're going to tell you guys. And I was like, we've been talking about they're not real for how many years now? I said,
Yeah.
there's
But
something
look
else
at
going
the
on.
time that information comes out, like at the time
Right.
where, we're
You-
like, we're just like, hey, the Epstein files, and then Trump's like, hey, Tylenol's bad for you, and everybody's like, oh, Tylenol, and we forget about it, and it's just we have to stay on focus. We cannot
Mhm.
be distracted by
Mhm.
the
The shiny thing.
the shiny things to where it's just
Mhm.
it's so
It's
easy to
amazing.
throw us off track, and that's not how we used to be. Like, Americans are known for being stubborn, dogged, opinionated, and I will debate you into the ground. Like, being
Mhm.
in debate teams or having debates as
Mhm.
presidential candidates used to be revered in this country.
Mhm.
And now you can't even have a conversation with somebody without it just like the topic just flickering away.
And
Yeah.
that goes. Go ahead, Wes. Sorry.
Just real quick, one of my favorite writers is Emerson, like of all time, not
Mhm.
just American writers. And can you imagine him or Thoreau putting something out today? It probably wouldn't even get picked up for publishing,
No,
right? They'd say,
no, because
we
it's
can't
too
even sell
hard.
this. Yeah, nobody's going to
It's
read
too
it.
hard. No, and the idea of knowing multiple languages or reading
Mm.
books for, people ask me like, "Oh, what do you read for fun?" I'm like, nonfiction. Like, what do you mean nonfiction? I'm like,
Well,
somebody's got to
just it's
read.
also just the dumbing of society. Like when the
Yeah.
president of the nation, I do not remember what country it was because there's been many, but he was visiting the White House, and the president, in sitting with him, Trump, said, "Oh, your English is beautiful, and how do you speak English so well?" And the look on the guy's face, he's like
I remember
so
that.
bewildered. He's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "What are you?"
I think it
Is
was
there something?
Liberia.
Liberia,
And
Liberia.
I was like, I think it's
And he
Liberia.
was
And I was
like,
like,
he was
that's a
like, is
colony.
there something,
Like
is
we
there
sent
something
Americans
wrong
there.
with the way I'm talking? Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, no, it's so beautiful. You speak English so beautifully. Like, how did you learn it? And he was like, it's the national language of Liberia, you racist idiot. And I'm
I
just
mean,
like, it's
if
like,
I could tell you the number of times people are like, your English is so good. And I'm like, I'm American. Like, yes, I'm
yeah,
Palestinian, but don't let this fool you. This is all I speak. I speak a little bit Arabic.
Yeah.
They're like, you
yeah,
have an accent. Okay, cool, cool. Glad we had this conversation, friend.
yeah. It's so, sometimes I feel like wanting to go up to a white man with the last name, and just start speaking Gaelic, and they'd be like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, oh, "I thought you were Irish. I mean, I thought that's how you all speak." It's it's just yeah, it's ignorance, and
Hmm.
ignorance has become so easy in this country because you don't have to be educated to be successful anymore.
No.
You can make $1 million a day on social media showing people how to put on makeup. You don't have to be intelligent nor educated, and that's scary.
And that's the world that we're in, is that it started, I blame it on this. It started with the idea of social media and how quickly it moved. And we have access to everything all the time. It's in our hands. And
Everybody's
the
an
other
expert.
part, everybody's an expert. And then the other part is, you have things with the education system. I came up in the age of No Child Left Behind. A lot of children got left behind.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, it's funny, but it's also not funny, because what it did was it dumbed down the idea of you have to work hard, or you have to, and if you're having trouble, we need to catch it. I think, I hope, in some spaces with some teachers, because I have school aged people around me, that it's shifting with the teachers that are coming up and saying, hey, let's catch things before. But it's more, that's a one-off. I don't know that every school system is capable of handling that with the funds and all the things that go into what our school systems are doing, and then the funding that goes into it with our taxes that should be going into our schools and fixing our streets. And I think that I had a conversation with Representative Price when he was still in office in 2021 with the siege on the West Bank. And I said, hey, you're the head of, you manage the committee of urban development. I'm working in a space that I have potholes all over and it is a busy area. Fix the streets here. Like, provide safe spaces. Help North Carolina. Like this, that's where your responsibility is. The cities that need you, not protecting, people that are stealing other people's homes in the West Bank. He's like, oh, well, it is what it is, kind of. I'm like, that's not a good enough answer, sir. I need better from you. I expect better from you. I voted for you. And so, um, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I wanted to say thank you both for participating in this and giving me your time.
Thank you.
Um, I know you're both very busy and got a lot on your plates, but I do appreciate you and all your work and your, being vocal, because it's nice to finally have people that have a voice and a position to be able to be loud when a bunch of us have been doing it for so long and then not gotten any traction. I have one last question for you. Do you feel, based on how you've, and this might be a longer answer, but based on your speaking out, has it affected you in your public circles, in your private circles, your professional spaces, and how have you dealt with that?
I'll let Wes go. I think he's taken more of an impact than I have.
Yeah, I'd say absolutely. Even before Gaza, my work on Gaza these last couple of years, before this current Trump administration, just claim being a veteran that's not right or far right, and that's in the public sphere to some degree at least. Speaking moderately, sometimes speaking with maybe a moderate, as I put it, moderate left bent, sometimes even moderate right. You do tend to get a lot of hate from people that you used to call at one point call brothers. So I've experienced that over the years consistently, and I'd say since January 20th, since this new administration, well, really since my outspokenness about Gaza, my work about civilian harm, civilian casualties prosecuted by the IDF. And then especially being so outspoken since January 20th, specifically after I left the Pentagon, the amount of hate I've gotten has been increased by hundredfold, from people that I even at one point counted as close friends. So, that's troubling. It's both angering and sometimes can be hurtful at the same time. But then you take a step back and you realize, okay, what you people are standing for is one, the antithesis of what you should have joined the military for in the first place. It's the antithesis of what America, at least what our America should stand for, right? And if that's where you're at now, then I feel bad for you more than anything. And I've had attempts to go after me professionally. I've had attempts to get me fired from positions as well. So the as they call it, the Nazi Karening that's happening today.
That's a new one. That's a new one. I'm a bookmark that one.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that one. Thank you.
But when you get over the anger sometimes that hits you when you have certain things happen to you, or certain people say things to you or do things to you in a certain way, then you can really take it as a badge of honor that, okay, this is what you are, and you hate me or don't like me or whatever it may be. I know I'm doing the right thing.
I get that. Thank you.
Yeah, I've had I retired when I went into this, and I had no intention of going back to work for anybody ever again. So people say, "Well, this will affect your future employment." Okay, but not working. I mean, I don't care. I mean, it doesn't bother me. And when people, I have no social media, so I don't know what people that I don't know say. If Cheddar Cheech Munch 47 from Anaheim, California wants to write something on his X page about me, I don't see it. Doesn't matter to me. It doesn't it doesn't influence or change the opinions of anybody that actually knows me. And when I take inventory of my life, and that, well, my dogs still like me, my wife still tolerates me, my children still love me, my family's proud of me, people that I respect and know in my life are proud of me, and that's all that matters. If um, I have not had one single person, and again, on the steps of the Capitol, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, in the halls of Congress, I have not one person to my face refute or disagree with me. So if they want to go to the internet and social media and smear me and do so without accountability, it doesn't matter to me at all. I find it rather funny.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Same here. Not one in person ever.
So after this conversation, I sat for a while in silence. Because what stayed with me wasn't just what Wes and Anthony said, it's what their stories proved. It's stuff that I know I've done the work for 20 years. I have been in these spaces and I have been navigating around them, sometimes coming in and out because, I won't know if it's working or not. But what stayed with me about that was that sometimes it's the ones who've seen the war the closest are the ones who finally call it what it is. Um, their military service didn't harden them, it broke them open to the truth, open to genocide, to the war crimes, the human cost that we keep ignoring. And even if we don't necessarily see eye to eye on every little detail, we still agree on the same thing that Palestinians deserve the right to live in freedom, safety, and dignity. And you know, like I said, coming back to this mic was hard, or this space. I really talked myself out of it several times, and I'm still working to not talk myself out of posting this. But this form of silence is not my baseline anymore. Um, it's the start of a new series, one rooted in courage, conscience, and truth. It's one that I want to keep highlighting people that are going out of individuals that are in my network that are going out of their way and fighting the uncomfortable to start something new and to speak out in different ways because we all have a role in this world to change it for the future. So I'm Sara, and this is Seriously Sara. Let's keep talking.